Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Wednesday the 20th of May 2015, and joining me on this edition are Steve Withers,
Furniture movers, we've got strange phenomenon, there's no listing.
Mark Hodgkinson,
They're here.
Mark Botwright,
Smell my clothes,
and Ed Selley.
You're jamming my frequency.
Hello, welcome back to the AVForums podcast, and like some kind of poltergeist thing that we are, we discussed last week, did we not, Edward, hanging things on walls and the possibility that they could fall off again.
Yes, that. Now, I don't know how much we... Obviously, last week's attempt to put the telly on the wall failed because the bracket was wrong. As we speak, the chap is back with a much more substantial-looking bracket. But
no, we're talking about your TV here.
I know. I'm just worried about having seen the photos. I'm just hoping that it's a very substantial bracket indeed, and it is in fact going to be, welded to my house.
The thing we're getting at here, I don't know if everybody's seen it or not. You head to the homepage and find a story about the OLED that fell off the wall. Now, this OLED was not Ed's because he can't afford one, and it wasn't the review sample. Although LG did panic when that photo went up and got in touch saying Mark hasn't dropped that TV, has he?
I was out all Friday afternoon as well.
So they'd obviously try to get in touch with you and then thought you, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was in hiding.
That makes
sense. I think it's safe to assume they shit themselves on Friday afternoon.
And we really shouldn't have laughed because it was a forum moderator, the Limey, who had paid a lot of money for this TV and had it installed, and it fell off the wall, and luckily enough he was there to catch it as it hit the glass cabinet underneath and smashed the glass cabinet. But the TV, thankfully, at the last time we're checking up on the thread anyway, still works. But this was what we discussed in last week's podcast, and Ed had trouble last week as well. So Ed, you've got a man in again today doing some more drilling.
Yeah, I showed him that thread. I said, I do not, I
do not want this.
This is not good. He has his own theories as to why that might have happened. When, having read the thread, it's very clear that a much heavier television has stayed on the wall for several years. But nonetheless, yes, it adds a certain nervous excitement, shall we say, to the business of my own television going up on the wall.
Did it come off the bracket, or did it just come away from the wall?
The bracket
with bracket in tow.
Came away with the television as best as that seems to be. It took a big piece of plasterboard with it as well.
Yeah, because it's what I've found from any kind of bracket is usually the bracket's fine, but it's the wall that will be the weak point.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is going on an external wall, my one, so I'm hoping that if my wall is a weak point, frankly, the television coming off is the least of my worries.
Wait, you see, the thing about the OLED coming off the wall is that OLED weighed nothing.
Yeah, I was going to say that's...
you could put it in a breeze and it'll float. Well,
last week
maybe
I had
not.
that 78-inch Samsung. If you put that on the wall, it's likely your entire house would fail.
It's a great advert for the TV, though, if it still works.
Yeah,
the Toyota Hilux of the high-end television world.
Yeah.
Well, it was last year's model, the EC970, and I think, Mark, and you can correct me on this one because I haven't seen it for a bit, but I think that isn't the back of that panel carbon fibre weave?
Absolutely no idea. It's shiny black plastic.
No, it's not. It's not just plastic. Because of the thinness of the OLED panel, they had to strengthen it somehow, and they used a carbon fibre, which I think is one of the reasons why it has survived that fall.
Right. Yeah, it does feel quite tough, I have to say. But I haven't tested it to the extent that the Lime did.
Right, go across there and throw it now.
Give me 5 minutes. I'll get my camera.
What's that hammer?
Make sure you've got another good alibi this time.
AVForums moves into the will it blend category.
Tear down. Extreme tear down.
Stress testing with a hammer.
So I guess what we said last week just doesn't account, because I think last week we said get a professional in. Well, you got a professional in the film. So the advice is what now?
The advice, I would say, if you've got a very new television, by which I mean a model where there's little experience on the forums, perhaps the small pool of owners ought to draw straws so that one of them has to experiment with putting the television up on the wall to see if it stays up. I mean, I'm relatively confident because there are umpteen GT60s in the world, and many of them are on the wall already. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be fine. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's not a huge amount of data to work out whether this is a 1 in a million thing, or whether the way that this bracket spreads the load and the mass of the television isn't quite as effective as it could be.
Maybe the curve played a factor.
Well, I mean, I frankly blame curved televisions for everything from about 1939 onwards, but I don't know. It strikes me as unlikely.
Is the curved TV the equivalent of Hitler, is it?
Yes. The great evil that threatens society as we stand.
It must slightly throw off, though, kind of its centre of gravity, where the weight's coming from. Particularly if it's any kind of amount where you're tilting it slightly further forward.
It surely still has to be balanced. Well, it has to be balanced left-right. I appreciate what you're saying about... OLEDs... most modern televisions, curved or otherwise, because they're so thin, don't they bulge at the bottom, so the weight is likely going to be there anyway.
Bulges at the back. It's got like a connections and the amplification speakers are like in a bulgy bit at the back.
It must be said. I think obviously I haven't got all of my historic televisions here to check, but I've always found all of the flat screens I've owned have been they have, as near as makes no difference, 50-50 weight distribution left to right. So unless someone's going to tell me otherwise, I don't think that should be a phenomenon.
I think this is a new section we need to add into the reviews. Is it 50-50 distribution?
How does it handle? Can you induce oversteer in your television?
What happens if you throw it from the top of the stairs?
I can see us having some issues with samples drying up from key manufacturers if we return everything in a dustpan and brush. I'm just saying.
Right, so anyway, I guess we've given some useful consumer advice in there somewhere. If you can find it, well done. Right, let's move on. Competitions. Hodge, round them up for us.
There's 55 Days at Peking, which I've never seen and I don't like the title of. And that one's available till the 1st of June. And then there's the entire Dirty Harry collection on Blu-ray, which is running till the 5th of June. And that's it.
Munich High-End Show, Ed. You went along,
Yes.
You had lots of jam and sausage, and you looked at some hi-fi.
Yes, I suppose if you wanted the most basic summation of what went on, I went out to Germany, I ate pork products, consumed some beer, and looked at some lovely, lovely radiograms. As ever, Munich, it's just another world, if I'm honest. It puts into perspective how, if you like, regional and in some regards limited shows in the UK are. And yeah, there's some activity at all ends of the market, which is actually slightly unusual for Munich. More often than not, it's a sort of festival of things that cost more than my house. But if I was put into perspective, in the space of 20 minutes, I was talked round the latest iteration of the Living Voice Vox Olympian loudspeaker, which I did put in a show report 2 years ago, so I didn't put it in again, but they've been making that even shinier and even better, and pricing is now, well, if you have to ask, you can't afford it, but think it's got to be in the region of £500,000. But then within minutes, I was in the Audio Quest room, and they were showing off a brand new DAC, which they'll be releasing in the next sort of 2 months or so, called the Beetle, and they are really very keen indeed to get the price hopefully below £140, which for state-of-the-art USB implementation, that's not bad at all. So yeah, there was activity at all parts of the market. I picked a couple of items which I felt were sort of relevant to across a spread of things of interest on the forum. But yeah, there's lots and lots of other items. I suppose one of the more interesting ones, and this may or may not appeal to Steve because he's the person that's reviewed the other part of this system. But Q Acoustics has finally relented, and they'll be releasing a centre speaker for the concept line with the funky gel core cabinets. So we'll have to have an argument over who gets to review that, because I suspect as a 5.1 system that's going to be mighty.
Now, is this a dedicated centre speaker?
Yes.
So it's different from the left and the right?
Correct. So they've gone to the effort of actually engineering it up, and given the cost of getting those cabinets tooled, that's it's not no small undertaking. But obviously we've got the Q Acoustics 3000 series. Those will be with me imminently. I've had to obviously wait until stuff's been done in the room. But then, yeah, as I say, the concepts, that promises to be a pretty high-end experience for still sensible money. I couldn't get a price out of Q Acoustics on the stand. It's to be absolutely confirmed and tied down, but it shouldn't be too outrageous, and I think that's going to be very interesting indeed. And then, obviously, XTZ, we're doing an Auro 3D demonstration, and very good it was too.
Is this your first Oro, you mean, Edmund?
Auro, leave me alone.
Oro.
What did you think of Oro? What was the demo of, first of all? And what
It was the standard demo disc. Obviously, I've not heard it stressing its stuff. The most interesting thing for me in relation to Atmos if you like, in loose comparison, and it can't, as you know, be a like-for-like comparison. But there is a real sense that Oro shifts the axis of the soundtrack much more than with Atmos. I occasionally get the feeling that it's the conventional soundtrack with stuff laid on top, and Oro just seems to be. It seems to be more. I hate to use the word holistic, but it's more sort of cohesive, and it just felt. I mean, it may simply be down to
your comparison. Now your comparisons here, Ed, are. I'm assuming that the XTZs had the speakers in the locations. And the one
yes, they were up on the. They weren't. They were actually on side walls, but height rather than up.
Okay, and the Atmos system that you've listened to, that was bouncing the sound off the ceiling.
In my own house, yes, but there were 2 Atmos demonstrations with proper in situ height channels going on at the show, and the Oro one just felt more, as I say, just felt a little bit more sort of cohesive across the whole, all of the speakers in use. Don't get me wrong, one of the Atmos demonstrations by a German sort of direct sale speaker company called Neubert was very, very good indeed. Given that by the standards of some of the speaker packages and sort of stereo speakers on display, it was comparatively sensibly priced. It really had properly impressive sort of sound pressure levels and was very clean, very cohesive, and had very good integration. But it was playing the Expendables 3, which, as we know, is still not a masterpiece of cinematic work, and it just didn't feel as together, admittedly, as the prime picked demo disc sequences that XTZ had to work with.
Just a quick aside, but last week I watched Unbroken in Atmos, which starts off with a bombing raid over Japan, and that first 15 minutes is some of the best sound design I've ever heard at home on anything, and that was an Atmos soundtrack, and it was absolutely amazing. There was bits where there's flak exploding around the planes, and the flak is exploding within the room in 3-dimensional space. It was just brilliant, and then the sounds, the plane creaking around you, bullets ripping through the fuselage. It was awesome. What the hell is that?
I think he's given up and walked off.
So right back, sorry.
Okay. Told you.
Yeah, so I would agree with Ed in the sense that I think some of the Atmos tracks I've heard so far have been more like 5.1 or 7.1 mixes.
But you've got speakers on the ceiling now. Absolutely,
yes. I mean, all I'm saying is I think there have been some tracks that have sounded like they've been basically 5.1 or 7.1 mixes with bits added on top. But this felt like a cohesive design from the ground up Atmos soundtrack.
Well, I mean, it's going to take people time to get used to the tools and get used to what they can do and what they can't do. Because, I mean, one of the things you don't want to do ever is to take the viewer out of the experience. No. So you can understand why there's been a bit of caution in terms of how things are mixed. But that's what John Wick, which he said was absolutely superb, now Unbroken. So it looks like we're starting to get...
Unbroken basically put you in that plane during that bombing raid. It was visceral in the extreme, and I absolutely loved it. But there's other scenes where they're in a life raft and they launch a couple of flares, and you see the flare going up in the air and basically exploding way above you. It was really good. And then I watched Gravity at the weekend, Atmos mix of that, and that's a real test of how tonally balanced your speakers are, because the voices are moving around that room in 360-degree space all the time, constantly just panning around you. Impressive again, but it'd be a great test disc for speaker systems.
Right, Eddie, back.
Yeah, sorry. There's
the TV's fallen off the wall.
No, it's unfortunate that the chap is very diligently measuring everything, which is possibly a problem because it would appear the people that built the house didn't. So the mount is perfectly aligned on the wall.
But the rest of the house is off skew.
My picture rail is not, so it makes the television look like it's on the piss. So we're just working out what we're going to do with that. So
we've all done that with a shelf at some point, haven't we?
Yeah, definitely.
Never go by the spirit level.
Oh no! As I say, his work is I've just been shown. It absolutely and 100% correct. It's just
no, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you can put up a shelf perfectly,
and then you realise shit.
Nothing else is straight.
Yes. Well, that's what's happening here.
So you're going to have to find how far off it is, and then see if you can get away with it with the TV.
Yeah, we're just going to correct it by eye. So I'm afraid, yeah. So I'll probably have to hurtle off again in about 10 minutes, but we'll keep going. So then.
So XTZs, what did you think of them sound wise? I know it's a show floor and it's never the best.
Well, it's one of the sort of cabin effects on the lower floor. I was extremely impressed. It's very weird to attend a very small number of multi-channel demonstrations in the middle of what is effectively an entirely stereo show. If you like, it sort of monkeys about with your own programming, because there are different things. You've been listening to sound in a certain way, and then obviously you've got much more going on. But I thought Handover was excellent. Despite the fact that when they were running the 2 triple stacks, there would have been a lot of bass radiating area in a small space, but it was all very well controlled, very well integrated. Yeah, sounded pretty smart by all accounts.
Yeah, I think for the money they are pretty special. Pretty special little speakers. Anyway, let's move on. Anything else of note from Munich?
There are two very peculiar, if you like, wars going on. The first is to see how many armatures you can stick inside a pair of earphones. I had thought that 10 might be a sticking point for some time, but no. So as you saw, Astle and Kern have had an American gentleman design them a pair of in-ear earphones with 12 drivers aside, which, yes, was quite something. And the other one is that record players are actually managing to get even bigger. Believe it or not, there were some absolute monsters, and not necessarily all expensive monsters, on display. And arms, the tone arm on a record player is generally about 9 inches long. Now, there's always been a small subset of people who may or may not be making up for other inadequacies who have gone for 12-inch arms, but obviously are people who feel that there is something else to make allowances for. There were arms of 15, 16 and one 18-inch arm at the show. So God knows what's going on there. From my limited understanding of engineering, that creates at least as many problems as it solves. But everyone seems happy, and they look quite amusing.
Right, let's move on, and let's go to Next Generation Blu-ray, and to tell us all about it is Mark Botwright.
Off.
Hodge, why don't you do this one?
Okay, yeah. So last Tuesday, the BDA finally confirmed the completed specifications for Ultra HD 4K Blu-ray. Now, we kind of knew what was coming, really, didn't we? It was just, it obviously supports the higher resolutions. It adds support for wider color spaces, higher bit rates, HDR, higher frame rates. It also includes support for the object-based new audio formats, namely DTSX and Atmos. Discs will be, how large were the discs?
100 gig.
100 gig and 66 gig, was that right? Yep, yeah. 66 gig and 100 gig, and we should be expecting to see products in store by Christmas.
Great. Any studios signed up, Steve?
Not that I've heard of, no. Yeah, I mean, look, I reread the piece that I think Mark wrote when they very quietly announced their plans at IFA last year. And they said they'd have their specs completed by June, so this May. So they basically completed the specs on time. And they said there'd be players in the shops for Christmas, which appears to still be the case. Certainly from talking to some of the manufacturers, they said, yeah, we're ready to go. What they're waiting on is the completed specs, obviously, and some studio support. And that's which is a bit quiet at the moment, I have to say. And it's going to survive, it's going to be a success or fail based upon the studio support. The studios that want to support 4K Blu-ray or UHD Blu-ray, great. If they aren't that bothered and they really want to move on to downloading and streaming, then we got a problem. I mean, hopefully there is money to be made in this and they'll do it. But
how many are you planning on buying?
Yeah. But for me, it's the only way I'm going to get 4K at home, isn't it? In any kind of real sense. So I need it to be supported. But
I was sitting watching 4K Netflix earlier on, Steve. House of Cards looks fantastic. Looks
great,
fantastic. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it looks.
Had it on in the background. Wasn't even watching.
Yeah.
So the problem is that they seem pretty cold on disc-based formats at all at the moment. Definitely some of the studios, like Fox, for example, should be quite down on Blu-ray. So.
It's either
we have to keep our fingers crossed.
The thing that stood out for me, Steve, is there was no studio support. Yet one of the big things that the BDA were pushing was this digital bridge, which is copying 4K material onto your hard drive. Basically, It's a digital copy.
Is it 4K resolution, or was it not going to be down-resed?
Let me just double check that I am getting that down. Ripping down legit digital bridge doesn't say, but I'm assuming that. Well, I'm assuming that it would have to be better than what they're promising at the minute, or what they do at the minute, which is digital HD. So if it's just digital HD, then whoopie-doo, it doesn't really stand out as an extra thing. It does it. So if it's a digital copy, a digital bridge, you have to assume it's at 4K.
I think it'll be down.
I don't think it will, because it says a range of in-home and mobile devices, and 4K support wouldn't be covered most of that, would it?
Yeah,
It's
it'll
like
be
a
digital
token
HD.
gesture.
Yeah.
But that's the problem. The
code.
studios aren't necessarily that keen on people having, pristine 4K discs in their hands that they can then rip and start pirating and copying and passing around. And let's be honest, no matter how good the so-called copy protection is going to be, usually within about a week of the disc format being released, someone's cracked it. So
but you see, the same was said for HD. We had exactly the same argument. Oh, a pristine HD version of the film, get pirated, blah blah blah. Kind of forgot about it pretty quickly, didn't we?
Yeah, true. I always think that piracy and that kind of thing isn't as big as the studios make it out to be honest.
What about Sony? What's Sony going to do? Because obviously they're a founder member of the BDA, aren't they?
Yeah, there's one.
They've got a studio. They've got the hardware.
A studio. So if there's one company you think could definitely support it, it'd be Sony.
You weren't at Bristol, or was it Bristol, or was it the other show where it was just Sony and they were showing off a 4K projector, but they couldn't show Sony Pictures footage in 4K because of licensing issues.
Yeah, I know. I've got to admit, you kind of wonder why they bothered. But I've always wondered why Sony bought Columbia Pictures and Columbia Records, and then go and don't release 4K UHDs, or worse than that at the moment is that if you want they're really pushing high res audio, and then they go and say, well, if you want to buy some high res audio, you should go and look at Lin and people like this because they're selling it. It's like you own a record company. How hard can this be? So
far harder than it appears than logic would suggest it is. I think is the only straight answer to that.
Sony were always that type of company, though. They're so big that the left hand never knew what the right hand was doing.
Anyway, the good news is the specs are finalised, and they certainly, from a basis of the specs alone, it would be awesome, in terms of the high resolution, DCI colour space. And just to make this clear again, we've talked about it before, but just because it says up to 2020 doesn't mean that's what you're going to get. It'll be DCI. So DCI colour space, 10-bit video, 420.
I think it's clear to say right now, Rec 2020 will never happen.
No,
so,
absolutely not.
It's a container. That is it. It is not a standard. It will never be used because technically it's too narrow a spectrum. And I'm not going to get technical here, but it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No. But we are approaching a point where, theoretically at least, you could be at home watching a UHD Blu-ray and pretty much getting what you're getting at the cinema. I mean, not quite, but very close to. In terms of resolution, in terms of color space, the higher bit video, the frame rates, everything that you're getting at the cinema, you're getting at home. So that's the dream, isn't it? I mean, we talk about home cinema. Well, you're trying to recreate the cinema experience at home, where you can almost literally do that now.
Yeah,
as long as studios sign up to it.
As long as studios support it.
Because otherwise, you're almost facing a kind of inverted version of what it was with DVD, where you will actually have more choice at the cinema than you will at home, which is a kind of weird way that it could happen.
Well, actually, we've got a strange situation at the moment where quite often it's the case that the longer cut of the film often comes out on disc, so you get a theatrical release and later on there's an extended cut on Blu-ray. So in some respects, you're not getting the full experience at the cinema, which seems a bit strange. But
what happened in the days of, and obviously, Mark, we're going back before you were born, but in the days of Laserdisc, not all the film companies were behind that as a format, but what we found, or what did happen, was that you had companies like Pioneer who bought the licensing to release films from a variety of studios on the Laserdisc format. And it could be that, there might not be any direct support or films getting directly behind it because it might be logistically too hard. But what you could see is maybe one or two companies set up to replicate and distribute under a banner quite a few different studios. That's one way that it could work.
That's already happening on Blu-ray. A lot of the smaller, back catalogue titles, the studios can't be bothered to release them, basically, and they're being selling the distribution rights to smaller companies like Twilight Time, people like that, Scream Factory, etc. And they're doing limited runs, sort of 2,000-3,000 copies and selling them that way. And these always sell out, by the way. It's really annoying because you can't get hold of them. But yeah, basically the studios can't be bothered with the smaller back catalogue stuff, so they're letting other people do it. So it's quite possible that would be one solution.
Well, what do you think is the likely outcome, Ed?
I honestly don't know. It comes down to a number of intangibles. I mean, if you get supermarkets signing up to sell the media, then I dare say that most film companies would presumably see that there was enough to be going on with enough demand to sort of to make it worthwhile. But you do get the feeling it's like everyone is standing on the edge of the pool, just waiting for somebody else to sort of jump in. I mean, don't get me wrong, the hardware people are all beavering away. I wish them the very best of luck. But yeah, it just seems like if the right people make the jump, then probably almost everyone else will. And there could be a degree of longevity and success with the format. Alternatively, if everyone decides to stay on the sidelines, not quite so easy to judge.
Rumours out there, players are going to cost £400 to £500.
That's a big barrier, isn't it?
Which, talking about the technology, that doesn't sound too bad.
That's not bad if you consider Blu-ray, how much Blu-ray players originally cost, and if they're backwards compatible, so it's you can offset some of that price.
Yeah, well, they have to be backwards compatible.
Yeah, they are
one of the things. So, yeah, I mean, I saw that price and I thought, well, if you're getting 4K resolution, P3 color space and so on, and the studio support it, I'll buy into it.
Can I just ask a quick question? What's the likelihood that this will be easier to be region-free than Blu-ray?
Oh, God
if they region lock something which is already, if you like, hovering on the edge of the mainstream, they are utterly suicidal.
Yeah,
I'd like very to think clear about this.
Not all studios actually use region locking. So like Warner's, Universal, Paramount mostly, sometimes Disney, sometimes Sony, not always, but sometimes, don't use region locking. Fox, I think, pretty much use it all the time.
But you have to stay so on top of which ones are and aren't region locked with Blu-ray that it practically
you do.
Pointless for anyone just casually looking at a Blu-ray to even bother with it.
It would be great if this new format there was no regional coding, and that would make perfect sense in terms of pushing it. The reason that locking still exists, given that most films open around about the same time in the UK and the US anyway, and generally have a big worldwide release, is that it's with smaller stuff. It's the stuff that gets where the production company sells distribution rights into different territories, and that's why some people still like to have region locking. But certainly, I think most of the big studios don't really care anymore.
As far as I'm aware, it's illegal in the EU
to regionally lock.
Yeah,
within the EU.
Within the EU, yeah. Well, that's. But I think it'll be such a niche that I don't think, because when Blu-ray first came around, there wasn't that an awful lot of locking going on, wasn't there?
There was no locking on HD DVD, was there?
No.
So I think locking is gradually a thing of the past. Because of the way that films are distributed and released these days. And I think it would make good sense if you're trying to push a fairly niche format. You don't want to cripple it and minimise its appeal across the globe. You want to sell as many discs and as many players as possible.
Especially if it's going to only launch with a few discs, or if it's not going to have a huge catalogue to start with. Early adopters are going to want to import.
It's just heartbreaking that we're on the precipice of having something this good in our homes, and it might flounder on the lack of support from the studios.
Oh, stop getting depressed. It's an interesting point you made there, Mark, because I'm seeing it already happening now with Dolby Atmos. I'm seeing people on the forums tracking down different releases in different parts of the world where the disc is coming out with an Atmos soundtrack and where it's not in other parts of the world. So certainly our audience, AVForums, people will go and search out different versions of the films in different regions, different areas, because it'll have stuff like Dolby Atmos. So yeah, if it's 4K and you've got different regions releasing different films and so on, then I can see multi-region players, if it's regional locked, being really popular, and I can see people, because it'll be such a niche, buying in from other territories. I quite like that idea.
I agree. I just hope that there is a recognition of this and it's made as relatively simple as possible. Otherwise it's just shooting themselves in the foot. No one's going to have more than, an infinitesimally small number of people are going to go to the effort of having more than one 4K player. So, if they are going to work out as being fairly pricey, you need to make sure that as much as possible can be played on it.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, that's how Oppo can get away with charging what they charge for their players. They're well built, they're well put together, they're universal. They play everything, streaming on there. And I noticed today that if you own an Oppo player, they are releasing an update so you can get Tidal on your Blu-ray players. So, yeah, that's definitely the future. That's definitely the way. I think these players, if they're going to cost that, they have to be universal. They have to be backwards. Well, they have to anyway with the specs. But they have to offer more than just a bog standard Blu-ray player just to get people interested.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Right, okay. Talking about new technology taking over, how would you like a projector where the bulb only dims by about 20% over its lifetime, its entire lifetime. And we're talking a long time. You could watch a film every day for the next 20 years and you still probably would only just be getting to the half-life. And it's now a possibility, and it doesn't cost tens of thousands. It does cost thousands, but not tens of thousands like it did in the past. So, Steve, you've been enjoying the Epson LS10000.
I have, yeah. I mean, when this projector was announced last year, it came as a bit of a surprise. It really came out of nowhere to a certain extent. You know, Epson had been releasing a lot of LCD projectors, bulb-based, obviously. There had been some attempts at alternative methods of lighting the panel. So you'd had LED projectors, which worked quite well. All the benefits you've just mentioned feel like long lifespan and
noisy
very
as
much.
hell.
Very well. The thing was, they were very. You have to keep the LEDs at a very specific temperature. So whilst you would think they'd be really quiet, they weren't at all. They had loads of cooling and were really noisy and not very bright. So they thought, okay, let's make them a bit brighter. So what they came up with was the hybrid LED laser projector, which used 2 LEDs and also a laser. So I think it was red and blue LEDs, and then a blue laser bounced off of a phosphor to create a green part of the spectrum. So that meant it was much brighter. But what we had with those, the few projectors that were released that we got to look at, all had massive green spectrums that you just couldn't tame. Everything had a little bit of a green tinge to it, basically, which kind of makes sense if we think about it in terms of like one the major source being the brightest part of the picture, if you like, being just purely green. Although green is the largest part of the visual spectrum, so it makes sense in that sense. But it just was difficult to tame it in terms of using CMOS, and they were all kind of cheap projectors like Acer, this sort of stuff. And then suddenly out of nowhere, Epson released or announced and then released in the States last year the LS10000 and the LS9000, which use laser, but not just a hybrid, they're full laser projection, which is basically what you're seeing now being installed in commercial cinemas. I think IMAX has started using laser projectors in some of their cinemas. And as you say, Phil, this is the wave of the future. You got bright picture, consistent picture, and a long life, like 30,000 hours.
My first question is, how does it measure?
What, in terms of accuracy?
And in terms of spectrum, colour spectrum?
I don't know yet. I measured it.
Steve doesn't know. He's been too busy pointing at airline pilots outside.
I haven't measured it yet, so I don't know. All I can say is it certainly looks nice and accurate out of the box, granted, but the picture quality, what it looks like, Phil, if you forget the fact it's a laser projector for a second, it looks an awful lot like a JVC in terms of its performance.
And this is a 1080p projector, and it
1080p projector, yeah.
It does the pseudo 4K thing, like
their version of the E-Shift that JVC are using. So. I can't remember exactly what it was like on the 500 but they had a number of different settings, right? So there's on the Epson, there's what they call 4K1 and 4K2 and 4K3. So each time you go up the scale, a bit more sharpening and a bit more what I can only describe as frame interpolation is going on. The image looks a bit too smooth. The higher up the scale you go in terms of using this 4K upscale, if you like. But certainly the number one setting, you get that same effect you get with E-Shift on the lower settings, where you get that sort of sense of increased detail, but without it being overly sharpened or being in some way smoothed. It looks really good. Like I say, gravity looked absolutely stunning on this projector. I've got to say, it's very bright. I've got it in the eco mode, and it's a pitch black room I'm using it in, but even in the eco mode, which is the lowest brightness setting, it's still plenty bright. You can adjust the size of the aperture if you want to. So in other words, you could reduce the amount of brightness. So it's
a fixed manual aperture, is it?
Yes.
So there's no there's no digital iris working then?
No, it's just a manual. You can open and close it manually.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah. There's no dynamic iris feature on it. There's a dynamic contrast feature, but what that's doing is boosting it's not changing the iris, it's just boosting the contrast in the image, which I've turned off anyway. It can support up to DCI color space. It's got HDMI 2.0 and HDCP 2.2 copy protection support. So from the point of view of what we've just been talking about with UHD Blu-ray, it can accept, although it's a native full HD projector in terms of the panel, like the JVCs, it can accept a 4K signal. And then you get the not all the full effect, but you get some of the effect thanks to the 4K upscaling, if you like. Again, like the JVCs. So you can still use it with 4K content. So it's not it's not native 4K like the Sony projectors are, but in terms of black levels, very JVC-like. I mean, they're using a similar type of technology to JVC, and JVC use LCOS. And this is
my X700 it accepts 4K images, and if you
Yeah.
put native 4K in, it looks really good. It looks far better than 1080 through the upscaler. You can tell that it's 4K material. It's not got the resolution there, but native resolution there, but it looks damn sight better than 1080 upscale.
In terms of future proofing, there's a couple of things where I guess you things like HDR maybe not so much, and I don't know whether it's 8 or 10 bit.
Again, this is another red herring. I think HDR, certainly with projector market as well. I don't think there's a real need for it, to be honest. If the brightness is there from the Epson, as you're saying it is, and it'll be interesting to see, once you get round to actually doing some measuring and that kind of thing, which would have been the first thing I'd be doing, to see what the results are and see exactly what the peak brightness is, usable peak brightness. And the other thing is, if you look in the lens with the laser, does it correct your eyes if you've got bad eyes?
That or blinds you for life.
I haven't looked in the lens for that very reason, thanks, Ed. I'm sure it's... I mean, obviously what they're doing is they're bouncing these lasers off of a phosphor to create the colour. So...
you haven't dropped any TVs, you haven't stared down the lens of a projector. What are you doing all day?
It's
To
not...
be fair, I'm quite glad about this because I don't want him... If Steve becomes sightless, that A, means that there's a danger that someone else has to go to the cinema more often, and B, he might start muscling in on my earphones and headphones racket, and I don't want that. They're all mine.
I think you're quite safe there.
Not if you can't see.
It's in terms of noise, by the way, because you were mentioning about LED projectors being quite noisy. This is I would say it was about the same as a bulb projector. It's not like super quiet.
So what projector?
Not very noisy either.
What projector you got? Is it the 500 you've got?
No, I've got an X3.
X3, right? So in terms of the X3, because that was what, 20 dB?
Yeah.
Is it the same as that?
It's in eco mode you're looking about the same, around about 20 dB. Bit like the JVCs though, when you turn on the 4K enhancement feature, there is a little bit of extra noise because you can actually hear it operating if you listen closely. So a bit more noise added there, but I would say it's about 20 to 22 dB in terms of in eco mode. Obviously, if you go up to a brighter setting, it
sounds like you don't need it in a bat cave.
No, not at all. No, I was only thinking more if you were doing 3D. Then you would obviously use a brighter setting. But in terms of
people still do 3D.
I love it. And 3D is great as well, by the way. Basically, I've got to say, first thing that struck me was when I got it out of the box was, shit, this is big and shit, this is heavy. It is really quite big. It's kind of like not dissimilar in terms of size to the and weight to the Sony VW1000, their original 4K projector. That was a pretty big beast. And this is also pretty big. It has a motorized lens cover, a bit like the JVCs again. But I got it out and I thought, God, this is big and heavy. And then I thought, it just so doesn't look or feel like an Epson projector, which is no disrespect to Epson, but it's been designed, clearly it's been designed to be a real premium, higher end AV product with an eye on the custom install market. So the whole thing, it's got this sort of lovely curved design. There's a push-out panel on the side, so you press it and it pops out, which has got some controls on it, but you can push back in again, so it keeps the nice, clean, sleek design, although that panel is exactly where you would put your hand when you're trying to lift it up. So every time you try and lift it up, the panel pops out. The back, when I first got it out, I was thinking, where the hell are the inputs? Because there was no sign of any inputs. And then I realized that you had to unscrew the back grille, and then that reveals the inputs. And what you can do is you can plug everything in as a tidy little cable management thing. And then you put the grill back on again. And again, it keeps it very nice and tidy. So they really thought about this in terms of, look, I mean, it's well built. And as I said, my entire experience was, it felt like I had to keep reminding myself it was an Epson and not a JVC. So there are an awful lot of similarities. And I don't know if that's intentional, whether that's just a coincidence, but still clearly, the technology involved is similar to what JVC used, and so you're getting very similar in terms of black level performance. But the big difference, obviously, is that this is using a laser projector, a laser light source, should I say? And I certainly hope that is the future, because when it comes to bulb-based projectors, bulbs are inherently flawed for the reasons you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, Phil, which is that they dim instantly. As soon as you start using them, they're starting to dim. They can lose 50% of their brightness within 500 to 1,000 hours. They're not very consistent. So if you get it calibrated after a few hundred hours, you need to recalibrate it really. And they don't have a very long optimum lifespan. So this eliminates all those problems all in one fell swoop. And it's bright and it's efficient and it's consistent and And also, I'll find out when I measure it, but it should be very accurate in terms of colours too, since you're using lasers.
Right, so the review will be up by the time this podcast goes up, yes?
Yes.
There you go, folks.
Not quite.
Famous last words.
First thing in the morning.
Yeah.
It'll be up on Wednesday, which is when this podcast goes up, yes.
Okay. Right, so that rounds up our hardware. We're going to games next. Hey, right, Mark. Games podcast is out. Tell us all about it.
Yes, Games podcast has gone up now. We discussed, as I said last week, Steam's U-turn on their charging for mods and the kind of outcry over that. Also, Star Wars Battlefront and just how much people are excited for that and how it tie in with the new films. The leak about Tony Hawk's, that we're getting a new game there. We also saw who was excited about E3 and any potential predictions about what we might see. And Guitar Hero, which obviously Leon, he's into his rhythm-based guitar games, and so he's suitably excited for that. And we also mentioned a Fonzie mirror.
I had a Fonz mirror.
They're good, aren't they?
I got it when I was 10 or 9 or 10 for a birthday.
So you've got a house full of tat as well?
No, it's not. I'm not got it anymore. But I did have one once. I had like a black print of it on, and it said "Hey."
That's what I've got.
It's quite smallish sort of thing.
Oh yeah. No,
handheld. Yeah,
well, I don't hold it.
You do.
I don't admit to holding it.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Send me a photo. So it's the same one.
Yeah. You'll see me on Dickinson's Real Deal one day.
I started to let mine go.
Right, Mark, we've got any games news?
Yep. I guess one of the kind of big reveals of the past week has been Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Not exactly a grand surprise or anything, given the fact that we knew various details of it from marketing and leaks and the like. No great surprise that this year, around the holiday season again, Ubisoft will be releasing another Assassin's Creed game. This time, though, Assassin's Creed Syndicate will be released for the PS4 and Xbox One, and sometime after on the PC. So obviously no last generation consoles, which the hope will be that obviously leads to a slight increase in quality. They'll be a bit more polished. This one's going to be set in London, and you've got twins. So there's a female character, which from Ubisoft's point of view means they've kind of got a little bit more savvy with regards to some of their comments last time about not including a female character.
Less.
No. It's if you were being cruel, you'd say that these games are now at the point where they're designed by committee.
But with that in mind, Mark, sorry to interrupt, is that, as I understand it, the last Assassin's Creed, even by the standards of a lot of new release games needing a bit of work on contact with the general public, the last one was heroically broken. Certainly in when it was initially released. Do you think that they are actually going to put, in light of that, they might actually try and release something which approximates to finished this time?
I think they will. I think that hurt them massively last time around, because there was one famous picture of a woman who didn't seem to have a face. I think that was during a cutscene, and it looked, the eyeballs were just kind of hovering in thin air, and that didn't help anyone. This seems actually quite a conservative effort. I mean, they transpose it to London.
Same sort of game engine, basically.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they're going too far out of their comfort zone. It's like they're taking what Unity was and polishing it. Changing the location, adding a few elements in there. You've got a lot of they showed off lots of horse-drawn carriages and the like, which looks like kind of GTA horse. But beyond that, it's really, I mean, for some time they have been kind of using the same elements, and every time they've tried to introduce something really fresh, it's met with some resistance. So I think with this, they'll just be looking to put out as polished a game as possible, and everyone's been crying out for a game in that kind of Victorian era, industrial age London for some time. So I think they'll have fans on side with this one, definitely.
Wasn't there? Hang on a second. What was the Order 1886?
Oh no, that was similar in style in terms of kind of the steampunkness of it all. But no, that was just a PS4 exclusive and a third-person shooter.
Fine, okay. I do find, as an increasingly old person, I find it very hard to keep up with these things. So,
well, if you're going for the Victorian era, then you're going around that kind of 1870 time where, virtually any game will say, well, we may as well weave in Jack the Ripper somewhere.
Yeah.
We may as well weave in Whitechapel.
When in doubt, let's kill some hookers.
And if Ed's describing himself as an old man, God help Steve.
Well, no, but I think the last contribution that Steve made to the gaming section of our podcast was when he found that you could get an Atari 2600 style wrap for an Xbox. Which may or may not be telling. But you own a PS4, I forget, of course.
I've got a PS4 and I'm looking forward to Battlefront. So, Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's online only,
Are you going to
I look forward to you being absolutely pasted by a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
I'll give him a 10 if he gets past level 1 without cheating.
Yeah,
but they don't do that with games anymore. Yeah, the days of if you bought something and you were just too shite to actually make any progress, the games sort of help you these days, don't they?
Well, they have to if they're charging £50 a go, don't they?
This is true. But proportionally, they were still charging a fortune, even when you had games. I mean, I'm probably dragging this. I mean, I remember one of the games for the Amiga, Project X. If you got to the end of level 1 on that, you were a Jedi, basically. I'm told that there were 4 or 5 more levels, but I never saw them.
When I was a youngster in the 80s, I was video game mad, and then it went like that, Ed, where it got more and more and more difficult, and in the end, it was just a case of, I'm going to find something else to do.
See, I forget the name of the game, but I'm sure there was one that was, I don't know whether it was apocryphal, but someone researched it, where it was technically impossible to complete. Where it was the kind of thing where it was just so ridiculously challenging that they assumed that no one could actually get to the end anyway.
You see, we were talking about the E.T. documentary, this thing about the rubbish tip and all the rest of it, and it was always down as being one of the worst games in history, which it was definitely proven that wasn't the case. And the reason people didn't like it was a bloody difficult game.
Well, yes, if you fell into a pit, that was it, which never goes down.
Quite harsh, isn't it?
Yeah.
We see that's what put me off video games back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was because it went too far that way. I got fed up and bored and went elsewhere.
Now, you see, I do agree with you up to a point, but there was also, late 80s, early 90s is also an evidence of some of the most perfect difficulty curves of any games ever released. I mean, when you think, admittedly, we're not talking about sort of, if you like, classic arcade style things, but if you think about the difficulty curve for Lemmings, how perfect was that? I mean, admittedly, over 144 levels, but it just a really lovely curve. And then stuff like Cannon Fodder and the like, it just really pitched it absolutely bob on. So yeah, some games were ridiculous, but equally others they really had it down pat.
But you've seen a great revival for that kind of thing as well.
And rightly so. It's just nostalgic people like me who can't cope with modern stuff because it's all a bit bright and fast. Going, oh yeah, Cannon Fodder, I remember that. So yeah. I mean, equally, I have to be honest. If I need to, I mean, obviously, it hasn't really happened since my son was born. But if I have a spare moment, either the Transport Tycoon Deluxe Edition or the original version of The Settlers are still the most relaxing ways to waste an entire weekend, in my humble and probably worthless opinion. I love those games, and both of them have to be knocking on 20 years old now. Have you ever played this Mr. Bones thing they referred to in the article, and why are people prepared to pay £105 for it?
No, I haven't. I mean, when it comes down to kind of retro games, it's not necessarily about what you want to play, though, is it?
Is it not?
No. I would assume it's quite similar to collecting vinyl.
Again, I guess it breaks down into 2 categories. I mean, I don't buy anything because it's rare. I buy it because I want to listen to it. And I'm assuming there are gamers that must do the same thing. But then equally, there must be people after mint unopened and games that are absolutely rubbish but only exist in tiny quantities. I suppose there's different drivers to what makes us buy stuff. Yeah,
but I mean, when you consider the fact that virtually everything that's of genuine value in terms of retro gaming is available online via emulation.
Yes,
quite easily to people, and often, I mean, with regards, certain the Hyperkin retro consoles, they will apply filters and things to them so that they look better. So therefore, it's still very much a kind of dedicated, almost an investment if someone wants it, if someone genuinely wants that. But I guess it almost goes back to the type of person who says, no, I'm keeping my Star Wars figures in their box.
Well, it's the 8-year-old that says that you've got to be worried about.
Right, so is that games news, Mark?
I think that is.
Where's your hay?
I'm not even going to get on.
Just me, or was there something slightly distasteful about the Fonz? Who was like basically a guy in his 30s dating high schoolers?
No, you just wished you're just annoyed that those rules don't apply to you.
Well, when I watched Happy Days, I was only a kid, so it was,
I think he was only supposed to be about 19 or 20, was he not?
Henry Winkler was well into his 30s by then.
Yeah, but look at Beverly Hills 90210. They were all supposed to be 18 and they're all in their 30s. Oh shit! Did I just say I watched Beverly Hills?
Yeah.
Oh, what do you know?
Oh, that's my career ruined. Right, so what's at the cinema, Steve?
Well, as we discussed at some length last week, Mad Max Fury Road.
Good, so we don't need to go into it then.
We don't really know. Actually, I don't know what, I'm going to go against the grain here and say that, because it's been getting pretty good reviews across the board, and much to my surprise, Sharuna reviewed it and gave it 9 out of 10, and Chris McAnee only gave it 8 out of 10, which I was quite impressed at. I was a bit bored, really. I mean, it's basically...
You're not a petrol head. So,
true, I'm not a petrol head.
Half the joy of the original Mad Max was working out what the object used to be before they apocalypted it. And you probably didn't spend any time at all doing that.
No, but I did watch Mad Max and Mad Max 2 prior, not directly prior, but the week before I went to go and see Mad Max Fury Road. So I got myself back into a Mad Max mood, and I thoroughly enjoyed Mad Max, and particularly Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, which I think is a fantastic film. Mad Max Fury Road is basically a 2-hour chase sequence. You know, I know that's the intention. I know that George Miller's idea was to create a film where he told story and characterization and plot through action, basically. But there isn't very much characterization. There isn't very much plot. And it basically is 2 hours of chases. And don't get me wrong, the chases are spectacular. The stunt work's amazing. It looks gorgeous. It's shot in the Namibian desert. It looks beautiful. But it's just really loud and really long. And eventually, it's like being banged over the head with a giant boxing glove. You know, it's kind of fun at first, but after 2 hours of it, I was getting a bit bored of it. It's everything in this film is cranked up to 11, and so at times I felt almost battered into submission by the end of it. I still enjoyed it in places. Laura, who went with me, hated it, absolutely hated it, and just was so glad to get out of the cinema after 2 hours of that.
It sounds like one of those conversations when someone tells you that they hate music in clubs because it's too loud to be able to talk.
A number of people, quite independently of one another on my Facebook feed, have described it as the loudest thing they've ever sat in the cinema with.
I could probably go along that. I mean, it looks awesome, I have to say. I mean, in terms of the photography, the locations, the cars, I mean, the stuff they build is just way out there. It's absolutely... I mean, the whole thing is bonkers, full of mutants and these insane-looking vehicles, and there's Charlize Theron with basically one of her arms missing. That's what I call method acting. So she's got like a robot left arm. Tom Hardy, I don't know where his accent's supposed to be coming from, but it's all over the place. It's not really English. It's not really Oz. Sometimes it does a bit South African. It's a very strange accent he's doing. It's not the easiest role, and I'm not a fan of Tom Hardy. I don't particularly like him. I know Kaz has a massive man crush on Tom Hardy, but personally, I'm not that bothered by him. He has none of the charisma of Mel Gibson. Admittedly, you obviously couldn't use Mad Mel now, but certainly.
To be honest, though, that's an ironic situation, given that he is
too mad to play Mad Max. He's too mad now to play Mad Max. But if you watch the first 2 films, he looks great. You know, he's got real charisma, and he's good looking, and you can't take your eyes off the guy. It works really well in that context. And Tom Hardy has none of that, in my opinion.
I've never once looked at Mel Gibson and thought any of those things, Steve.
What, you don't think Mel Gibson's an attractive man? I think Mel Gibson's an attractive man. Well, was an attractive man. Come on, seriously. I certainly think most women would probably agree with that statement.
It's no fun.
Yeah, he's not true. That's true. It's a Mad Max movie. So if you've seen a Mad Max film, then you know what to expect, and you're going to get it, and you're going to get it in spades. I just think maybe an hour and a half would have been, because if you look at the previous 3 movies are all an hour and a half long, and that's about the right length for this kind of thing. It's just too much of everything. It's just too long, too loud, too big, too brash, too insane. Not enough, and then conversely, not enough characterization and plot, in my opinion. So,
right, okay.
I came away a bit disappointed, really. It's a shame.
Good. I like it when you get disappointed. Right, let's move on. Films opening this Friday.
Right. Well, this Friday we've got Poltergeist, the latest in a long run of unnecessary remakes.
Now, how do you know it's unnecessary? Have you seen it yet?
No, but Poltergeist, the 1982 version, is great. Why do you need to remake something? They got it right the first time.
It could be even better.
Looking at the trailer, it looks like it's pretty much a shot-for-shot remake of the original film. So if you took it in a completely different direction, maybe that you're right. Maybe you could take a film, remake it. I mean, if you look at, say, The Thing, John Carpenter's...
Well, I was just thinking Mad Max. So you got the original Mad Max, and then you got the second Mad Max. They're basically the same film, but the second one's far better.
Yeah, or Evil Dead 2 and Evil Dead.
Yeah.
But in the trailers, it looks like they're just kind of just doing the same thing over again. And so, well, we'll see. I mean, maybe it'll work. But I love the original Poltergeist because I guess it's partly my age, and you saw it as a kid, so you're sticking by it. But
I thought it was a 70s film, not a 60s film.
1982. Shut up. And the other film opening on Friday is Tomorrowland, which is a new film from Brad Bird. So the press screening's on Wednesday. The film opens on Thursday. And that way, at least, I guess they hope to keep some surprises. But it looks interesting. It's got George Clooney in the lead role. What I've seen in the trailers has piqued my interest, and I am looking forward to seeing it. I'm assuming I'm the only one who's going to go to see any of these films at the weekend.
Look, I really want to go and see Mad Max, but the chances of me making it to the cinema are roughly equivalent to me winning the lottery. And actually, to be honest, I'd rather win the lottery. But nonetheless, yeah.
Given the option, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, it's regrettable, but it's going to be another film.
How much does it cost for a babysitter nowadays?
Enough.
Really?
Especially as the other thing is that it is my wife's, sort of thing, her method of unwinding a bit. She goes on a Sunday evening, and that means I obviously can't. So
I think she's getting away from you as well as the baby.
There's undoubtedly an element of that, but I've got an enormous valve amp to listen to, so I don't care. So there you go.
Right. Any Blu-rays worth buying this week, Steve?
Yes, we've got Big Hero 6 coming out on Monday, which I haven't seen yet, but actually has really good reviews and looks like it'd be really good fun. It's a Disney animated film in 3D, if you like 3D still. So I'm looking forward to that one coming out next week.
Simon did a review of that on the site, didn't he?
He did the cinema release. And he enjoyed it. He thought it was really good. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm getting that on Disney next week, actually. So I'm looking forward to that. And also a rare 3D treat. So, good. And also we've got Wild, which is the film with Reese Witherspoon, which she got nominated for an Oscar for. Again, I like the look of this. I haven't seen it yet, but
is this
the
backpacker?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
But
based on a true story, isn't it?
Yes, and I think, but I'll probably catch that when it pops up on Netflix or something like that, to be honest. But certainly it's a film I'm interested in seeing at some point. And also released on Blu-ray next week is BBC's new series Shark, which photography-wise I'm sure will look absolutely stunning. Certainly on TV, the photography is amazing. But as I was talking about this with you this morning, Phil, it really does show the limitations of full HD broadcasts at the moment.
On the terrestrial tuners on this TV I'm testing at the minute, I thought it was a serious problem with it. Because there was so much in terms of gradation issues and stair-stepping and all sorts of things going on. But no, it's just crap compression for digital broadcast. It will look really nice on disc. But
it'll look gorgeous on disc.
The thing is, you got to pay for the disc.
True, but I mean, it's not a big deal if you want to watch something. I mean, when you watch these documentaries, these Netflix documentaries like this or more recent ones, quite often now they have these little production diaries at the end, have you noticed, like the last 5 minutes or so, and they go into how they shot some of the scenes in that episode. And when you realise they've spent maybe 5 or 6 years producing this series and the lengths they have gone to get some of the shots, you got to respect them. And you can see they're using really top-notch equipment. I mean, they were using red cameras a lot of the time on these shoots by the looks of it.
I wasn't bothered about the guy with his camera. It was the fact that he didn't have a cage and he was swimming.
Yeah, he was amongst great whites.
With 3 great whites and huge female great whites, not little tiddlers, like 3 big, massive females.
Balls the size of church bells.
Yep. Of course, you're watching it just thinking, I hope he gets eaten.
Well, didn't they say last week, the week before, the first episode said that they're in shooting something like 360 hours of footage. Not one cameraman or anyone got attacked by a shark in the whole time. So
you do expect to see at the end of it dedicated to the memory of.
It's a shame all this is getting cut out.
And And that's it for Blu-rays, Phil.
Okay, and sadly, that's it for the podcast this week. We've run out of time. So my thanks to Steve Withers.
You son of a bitch. You left the bodies and you only moved the headstones.
Mark Hodgkinson.
This house is clean.
Mark Botwright.
Do that one.
Right.
And I was going to do it in accent.
Oh, I can't remember.
Well, go on then. Do it in the accent.
This house is clean.
And then Selley.
I'll go check the kitchen.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmarkavforums.com for latest reviews, news and video. And you can also leave us a rating on iTunes. If you enjoyed the show, I'm Phil Hinton. Thank you very much for listening. And we'll see you again next week.
I was secretly hoping during that podcast recording that at one point we'd hear a massive crash in the background.
Yeah. Fuck you and the ship you sail here in.